The grand halls of Crestwood University buzzed with energy, a place where only the brightest minds were said to belong. Nestled in a picturesque town, it was known for producing Nobel laureates, tech moguls, and world leaders. But amidst the polished marble floors and towering bookshelves filled with centuries of knowledge, there existed an invisible barrier, a subtle yet suffocating air of elitism that made some feel like they didn't quite fit in. Marcus Johnson stepped onto campus. On a crisp autumn morning, his heart pounding with equal parts excitement and nerves, he carried with him not just his suitcase but also the weight of expectations, his parents' sacrifices, his community's hopes, and his own dreams. Transferring from a modest college in his hometown, Marcus had earned his spot through sheer determination and academic brilliance. Yet as he walked past groups of students chatting confidently about internships at Fortune 500 companies, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. His first class was Advanced Engineering Principles, taught by none other than Professor Langley, a man whose name echoed through the corridors of Crestwood like a legend. With his sharp suits, piercing gaze, and reputation for pushing boundaries, Langley commanded respect, or fear, from everyone. As Marcus entered the lecture hall, he noticed how effortlessly the professor interacted with certain students, calling them by name and laughing at their jokes. These were the chosen ones, the children of donors or protégés handpicked for success. Marcus slid into a seat near the back, clutching his notebook tightly. When the professor began discussing quantum computing algorithms, Marcus leaned forward, eager to contribute. The topic fascinated him. He'd spent countless nights reading papers and experimenting with simulations during his previous studies. At one point, Langley posed a question to the room. How would you stabilize a neural network under unpredictable variables? No one answered immediately. After a brief pause, Marcus raised his hand hesitantly. You could integrate adaptive feedback loops, he suggested, his voice steady despite his nerves. It's similar to what Tesla did with their autopilot systems. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the laughter. Not warm or encouraging, but mocking. A few students snickered and Langley smirked, shaking his head slightly. Interesting theory, he said dryly, though his tone implied otherwise, but perhaps too simplistic for this level of study. The comment stung, but Marcus forced himself to nod politely, pretending it didn't hurt. As the semester progressed, such incidents became routine. In another class, Professor Whitaker dismissed Marcus's idea for improving solar panel efficiency as unrealistic, without even considering its merits. During group projects, teammates often relegated him to menial tasks, assuming he wouldn't understand the more complex aspects. Even casual conversations in the cafeteria felt strained, as if people expected him to stumble over technical jargon or admit he didn't belong. Yet Marcus refused to let bitterness take root. Every evening, after most students had retired to their dorms, he stayed up late in the library, poring over textbooks and journals. His notes grew thicker, his insights sharper. Though no one seemed to notice, Marcus was quietly proving himself, not for their approval but for his own satisfaction. Deep down, he knew his journey wasn't just about surviving Crestwood. It was about thriving against all odds. Little did anyone realize the quiet young man in the corner was destined to leave an indelible mark on their lives. And when the time came, they would have no choice but to see him for who he truly was, a force to be reckoned with. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus found himself retreating further into his own world. The constant dismissals and subtle jabs from professors and peers began to weigh heavily on him, but he refused to let them break his spirit. Instead, he channeled his frustration into action, pouring every ounce of energy into his studies. While others complained about the workload or spent weekends partying, Marcus could often be found hunched over his desk, scribbling equations, debugging code, or sketching out designs for projects that intrigued him. His roommate, Alex, a laid-back sociology major with a knack for storytelling, noticed Marcus's relentless drive early on. One night, as Alex lounged on his bed scrolling through social media, he glanced over at Marcus, who was furiously typing away on his laptop. "Dude," Alex said, tossing a crumpled candy wrapper at Marcus's head, You're gonna burn yourself out if you keep going like this. Marcus paused, looked up, and gave a small smile. If I stop now, they win, he replied simply, before returning to his work. Alex didn't fully understand what Marcus meant by they, but he admired his determination. Over time, Alex became something of a confidant, listening as Marcus vented about the challenges he faced. Sometimes it was the condescending remarks during lectures. Other times it was the way people avoided sitting next to him in class or left awkward silences when he joined group discussions. It wasn't overt hostility. It was worse. It was exclusion masked as indifference, a quiet reminder that he didn't belong in their circle. Despite the isolation, Marcus discovered solace in the things that truly mattered: learning and creating. He tackled problems no one else dared to touch, finding joy in solving puzzles that seemed unsolvable. Late one evening, while working on a particularly tricky algorithm for a robotics project, Marcus stumbled upon a breakthrough. His solution was elegant, efficient, and innovative. Exactly the kind of thing professors praised when submitted by their favorite students. But when Marcus presented it during office hours the next day, Professor Whitaker barely glanced at his notes. "Interesting approach," she muttered distractedly, already turning her attention back to her computer. Moments like these tested Marcus's resolve, but they also fueled his ambition. He started keeping a journal where he documented not only his ideas but also his thoughts and feelings. Writing became a form of therapy, helping him process the loneliness and doubt that crept in during quiet moments. In those pages he reminded himself why he was here: to make a difference, to honor his family's sacrifices, and to prove that excellence had no color or background. Outside of academics, Marcus tried to connect with others, though these attempts were often met with mixed results. He joined a few student organizations, hoping to find like-minded individuals, but many events felt performative rather than genuine. At a campus diversity panel, he listened as speakers talked about inclusion and representation, yet afterward, attendees drifted toward cliques divided along familiar lines. Still, Marcus held on to hope. He believed change was possible, even if it wouldn't happen overnight. One bright spot came unexpectedly in the form of Dr. Patel, an assistant professor who taught environmental engineering. Unlike some of her colleagues, she took the time to engage with all her students regardless of their background. During a lab session, she approached Marcus after noticing his meticulous work. "You've got a real talent for problem solving," she remarked warmly. "Have you thought about applying for the summer research fellowship? You'd be perfect for it." Her words caught Marcus off guard, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were sincere. For once, someone saw potential in him beyond stereotypes or preconceived notions. Encouraged by her support, Marcus applied for the fellowship and was accepted. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to him. As he celebrated quietly with Alex later that night, Marcus realized something important. While he couldn't control how others treated him, he could choose how he responded. And he chose to keep moving forward step by step until he reached his goals. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his perseverance was setting the stage for something bigger. The cracks in the elitist facade of Crestwood University were beginning to show, and soon, the very people who doubted him would be forced to confront the truth. Greatness doesn't care about privilege. It thrives on resilience. The day started like any other at Crestwood University. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the engineering lab, casting golden beams onto rows of workstations cluttered with tools, wires, and half-built prototypes. Students buzzed around, preparing for what was supposed to be a routine demonstration of their latest robotics project, a state-of-the-art drone designed to assist in disaster relief scenarios. It was the culmination of weeks of hard work, and everyone was eager to impress the faculty members who had gathered to observe. Marcus stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, watching as his classmates made final adjustments. Though he hadn't been assigned a leading role in the project, likely because some team members doubted his contributions, he had still volunteered to help wherever needed. His sharp eye for detail had already caught several flaws in the design, which he quietly pointed out to the group leader, Rachel. She acknowledged his suggestions with a curt nod, but didn't thank him outright. Still, Marcus didn't mind. He knew his input mattered more than recognition. Professor Langley took center stage, addressing the room with his usual air of authority. "Today," he announced, "we'll witness the future of autonomous technology." He gestured toward the sleek black drone hovering silently above a designated testing area. Cameras clicked and murmurs of excitement rippled through the crowd as the device began its pre-programmed flight path. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until it wasn't. Without warning, the drone's rotors screeched, emitting an ear-splitting whine that silenced the room. Its movements became erratic, jerking violently from side to side. Panic spread quickly as students scrambled to grab laptops or tablets, trying desperately to regain control. Someone shouted, "Shut it down!" But no one could figure out why the override commands weren't working. Sparks flew as the drone careened into a shelving unit, sending equipment crashing to the floor. Then came the real danger. The drone veered dangerously close to a gas line running along the wall. If it struck the pipe, the resulting explosion could devastate the entire building and everyone inside. Screams erupted as people realized the severity of the situation. Many bolted for the exits, while others froze in terror. Amid the chaos, Professor Langley remained rooted to the spot, his face pale with shock. Standing just feet away from the malfunctioning drone, he was too stunned to move. That's when Marcus sprang into action. Pushing past frantic students, he grabbed a nearby laptop and dropped to his knees, fingers flying across the keyboard. Everyone else was either panicking or paralyzed, but Marcus's mind was razor-sharp, focused entirely on the problem before him. He remembered reading about similar incidents during his late-night research sessions. There had to be a way to manually override the system if the automated protocols failed. "Get me access to the mainframe," Marcus barked, surprising even, himself with the urgency in his voice. A wide-eyed student handed him a USB drive containing the drone's firmware. Time felt like it was standing still as Marcus worked, sweat beading on his forehead. The drone continued its deadly dance, now mere inches from the gas line. Each second stretched into eternity. Finally, Marcus found what he was looking for, a hidden subroutine buried deep within the drone's operating system. With trembling hands, he typed out a series of commands, praying they would work. Rounda. Him. The room fell eerily silent, all eyes glued to the screen as the drone's propellers slowed, then stopped. The machine hovered briefly before descending gently to the ground, harmless once more. For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Students rushed forward, patting Marcus on the back and shouting words of gratitude. Even those who had once dismissed him stared in awe. Professor Langley, still shaken, approached Marcus cautiously. You saved us," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, exhaling deeply as the adrenaline began to fade. "Just doing what needed to be done," he replied simply. But deep down he knew this moment would change everything, for him, for the professors, and for the university itself. The room was still buzzing with disbelief as Marcus stood there, laptop in hand, his heart pounding from the adrenaline rush. For a moment it felt surreal, like stepping into a different version of reality where everything had shifted. The same people who had once mocked him or dismissed his ideas were now looking at him with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of awe and guilt. It wasn't just gratitude radiating from them, it was something deeper, almost unspoken. They had witnessed not only his technical brilliance but also his courage under pressure. Professor Langley, usually so composed and commanding, seemed shaken to his core. He lingered near Marcus, his usual air of superiority replaced by vulnerability. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "You acted when none of us could. You saved lives today." Marcus met the professor's gaze steadily, though inside he was processing the weight of the moment. This was the man who had belittled him in front of the entire class, questioned his competence, and treated him like an outsider. Yet here, He was standing before Marcus, humbled and sincere. "It wasn't about me," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. His tone was calm but firm, carrying an authority that surprised even himself. "It was about solving the problem before it became a tragedy. That's what we're all here for, isn't it? To learn, to innovate, and to make things better." His words hung in the air, resonating far beyond the immediate situation. Students nodded quietly, some whispering among themselves about how Marcus had stayed cool while everyone else panicked. Others looked embarrassed, realizing they had underestimated him, not just during this crisis but throughout the semester. Rachel, the group leader who had barely acknowledged Marcus's contributions earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. "Marcus," she began, her cheeks flushed with shame. "You were incredible. None of us could have done what you did." Marcus gave her a small, polite smile. "Thanks," he replied simply, brushing off the compliment without arrogance. He didn't need validation from anyone right now. What mattered most was that the crisis had been averted and everyone was safe. Still, he couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. All those months of being overlooked, sidelined, and doubted. And yet, when it truly counted, he had been the one to step up. As the initial shock wore off, conversations erupted around the lab. Some students began dissecting what had gone wrong with the drone's programming, while others speculated about how Marcus had managed to override the system so quickly. A few approached him cautiously, asking questions about his process. "How did you think of accessing the subroutine?" one asked eagerly. "And why didn't anyone else see it?" Marcus answered patiently, explaining his thought process in simple terms. "Sometimes solutions aren't obvious because we're too focused on the big picture," he said. "But if you break things down piece by piece, patterns start to emerge. I've always believed in looking at problems from every angle, even the ones nobody else considers." His explanation earned nods of admiration, but more importantly, it sparked curiosity. People who had never paid attention to him before suddenly wanted to know more about his methods, his ideas, and his perspective. Even Professor Whitaker, who had once dismissed his solar panel proposal, approached him with genuine interest. "Your approach is remarkable," she said, her tone lacking its usual condescension. "We should discuss your insights further. Perhaps you'd like to present them at our next faculty meeting?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by the invitation. Just days ago, he wouldn't have dreamed of being asked to share his thoughts with the faculty. Now it felt like a door had opened, one he hadn't even realized was closed. "I'd be honored," he replied, keeping his response measured. He knew better than to let his guard down completely. Praise could be fleeting, especially in a place like Crestwood, where appearances often mattered more than substance. Still, as the crowd dispersed and the cleanup began, Marcus allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. Standing there amidst the scattered tools and debris, he felt a strange sense of vindication, not because he had proven his critics wrong, but because he had risen above their judgments. In saving the day, he hadn't sought recognition or revenge. He had simply acted out of instinct and integrity, and in doing so, he had forced those around him to confront their own biases. For the first time since arriving at Crestwood, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe change was possible, even in a system as rigid as this university. Maybe action spoke louder than prejudice, and maybe resilience could rewrite the narrative. As he packed up his laptop and prepared to leave the lab, Marcus carried with him not just the memory of triumph, but also the promise of new beginnings. The days following the drone incident brought a palpable shift in the atmosphere at Crestwood University. What had once been whispers of doubt and skepticism about Marcus now turned into murmurs of admiration, and for some, quiet guilt. The professors who had mocked or dismissed him were forced to confront their own biases, while students who had ignored him began seeking him out for advice. It was as if the entire institution had awakened to the realization that greatness wasn't bound by stereotypes. Professor Langley in particular seemed deeply affected. He sought Marcus out after class one afternoon, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Marcus, he began, clearing his throat awkwardly. I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus looked up from the textbook he'd been reading, surprised but not entirely shocked. I judged you unfairly, Langley continued, his voice tinged with regret. Your contributions in class, I dismissed them too quickly because of my own prejudices. And then, when you saved us all, his voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. For a man accustomed to being revered, admitting fault clearly didn't come easily. Marcus studied the professor for a moment before responding. Apology accepted, he said simply, his tone calm but firm. But let's be clear, it's not just about me. There are other students here who face the same challenges I do. They deserve a chance to shine too. Langley nodded slowly, visibly moved by Marcus's grace. You're right, he admitted. This isn't just about making amends with you. It's about changing how we operate as a department. We need to create an environment where everyone feels valued, not just those who look or sound like us. Word of Langley's apology spread quickly among the faculty, sparking conversations that had long been avoided. Some professors resisted the idea of change, clinging to the belief that merit alone determined success. But others, inspired by Langley's humility, began questioning their own practices. Dr. Patel, ever supportive, took the lead in organizing a faculty meeting dedicated to discussing inclusivity and bias within the engineering program. She invited Marcus to attend, not as a token gesture but as an equal participant. At the meeting, Marcus spoke candidly about his experiences, sharing stories of exclusion and resilience without casting blame. I came here to learn and contribute, he explained, his voice steady. But every time someone doubted me, it made me question whether I belonged. That doesn't mean I gave up. It means I worked twice as hard to prove myself. Imagine how much further I could have gone if I hadn't been fighting against those doubts. His honesty struck a chord with many in the room, even the most skeptical. Professors found themselves nodding along, realizing that Marcus's struggles were symptomatic of larger issues within the system. By the end of the meeting, there was a tentative consensus. Something needed to change. Ideas for mentorship programs, diversity workshops, and revised evaluation methods began taking shape, fueled by a newfound commitment to fairness. Outside of these formal discussions, Marcus noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with him. Classmates who had once excluded him now invited him to join study groups. Professors who had overlooked his ideas started calling on him during lectures, genuinely interested in his perspective. Rachel, the group leader from the robotics project, even asked him to collaborate on her next research paper. You bring something unique to the table, she told him sincerely. We need more minds like yours. Despite these positive shifts, Marcus remained cautious. He knew that apologies and promises were only the first steps toward real change. Actions would speak louder than words, and he intended to hold the university accountable. Still, he couldn't deny the sense of vindication that came with seeing his detractors acknowledge their mistakes. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. One evening, as Marcus sat in the library reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, Alex walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. Handing one to Marcus, he grinned. So, hero, he teased lightly. How does it feel to have the whole school eating out of your hand? Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. They're not eating out of my hand, he corrected. They're finally listening. That's all I ever wanted. Alex raised his cup in a mock toast. Well, here's to breaking barriers and proving them wrong. As they clinked their cups together, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to keep pushing forward, for himself and for everyone else who deserved a fair shot. Change might be slow, but it was happening, and Marcus Johnson was leading the way. With the university beginning to take small but meaningful steps toward inclusivity, Marcus saw an opportunity to push for even greater change. He didn't want his efforts or the lessons learned from the drone crisis to fade into memory. Instead, he envisioned something lasting, a program that could uplift underrepresented students and ensure they had the tools and support needed to thrive. One evening, While brainstorming ideas with Alex, Marcus voiced his thoughts. "What if we created a mentorship initiative?" he suggested, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Something designed specifically to help students who feel like outsiders, people like me when I first got here. We could pair them with faculty members or upperclassmen who understand what they're going through." Alex nodded enthusiastically. "That's brilliant. But how do you plan to sell it to the bigwigs? You know they'll drag their feet." Marcus smirked. "They might at first," he admitted. "But after everything that's happened, I think they'll listen, especially Professor Langley. He's been trying to make things right, and this could be his chance to lead by example." The next day, Marcus approached Dr. Patel with his proposal. She listened intently, her expression softening as she grasped the potential impact of such a program. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need," she said, smiling warmly. "Let's present it to the dean together." When Marcus stood before the administration board a week later, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. Flanked by Dr. Patel and Professor Langley, who had both agreed to co-sponsor the idea, Marcus laid out his vision. Using simple, yet compelling, language, he explained how the mentorship program would work. Pairing incoming minority students with mentors who could guide them academically, professionally, and personally. He emphasized the importance of representation, sharing anecdotes from his own journey to illustrate why these connections mattered. At first, some board members hesitated, citing budget constraints and logistical challenges. But Marcus anticipated their concerns. "We don't need millions to start," he countered calmly. "We can begin small, with volunteers, workshops, and networking events. The key is creating a culture where everyone feels supported. Once we see results, others will want to invest." His passion was infectious. Even the most skeptical administrators couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice or the logic behind his plan. Slowly, they began nodding in agreement. By the end of the meeting, the board approved a pilot version of the program, agreeing to fund it modestly while monitoring its progress. News of the initiative spread quickly across campus. Students buzzed with excitement, eager to participate either as mentees or mentors. Applications poured in, far exceeding expectations. Many professors, inspired by Marcus's leadership, volunteered their time to help shape the program. Even alumni took notice. Several high-profile graduates publicly endorsed the effort, offering financial support and resources. As the weeks went by, Marcus threw himself into organizing the program's launch. Working alongside Dr. Patel and a team of enthusiastic volunteers, he planned orientation sessions, training workshops, and social events designed to foster community. During one late-night planning session, Alex joked, "You're turning into a one-man revolution, you know that?" Marcus laughed, but knew there was truth in the comment. Every email he sent, every meeting he attended, brought him closer to fulfilling his vision. And when the first cohort of mentees gathered for orientation, a diverse group of freshmen brimming with hope and ambition, Marcus felt a profound sense of pride. These were the future leaders of Crestwood, and he had helped pave the way for them. The program's early success wasn't without challenges. Some participants struggled to connect, while others faced resistance from peers who resented the extra attention given to underrepresented groups. But Marcus remained steadfast, reminding everyone that growth often came with discomfort. "Change isn't easy," he told the group during a particularly tough week. "But if we stick together, we can build something incredible." By the end of the semester, the impact was undeniable. Mentees reported feeling more confident and supported, while mentors spoke of the joy they found in guiding the next generation. Faculty members noted improved collaboration among students, breaking down barriers that had long divided them. Even the university's reputation benefited, as news outlets highlighted Crestwood's innovative approach to fostering diversity. Through it all, Marcus never sought the spotlight. He worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring the program ran smoothly while encouraging others to take credit. Yet no one doubted W. As the mentorship program gained momentum, Marcus found himself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond what he had initially imagined. The initiative wasn't just helping underrepresented students. It was reshaping the culture of Crestwood University itself. Conversations about diversity and inclusion became commonplace in classrooms, faculty meetings, and even casual hangouts. Professors who had once dismissed these topics as irrelevant now actively sought ways to incorporate them into their teaching. It was as if the entire institution had woken up to the realization that progress required more than technical expertise. It demanded empathy, understanding, and collaboration. Professor Langley, in particular, underwent a remarkable evolution. Once known for his arrogance and elitism, he began approaching his role with humility and purpose. He reached out to Marcus frequently, not only to express gratitude but also to seek guidance on how to be a better ally. "You've taught me so much," Langley admitted during one of their private conversations. "I used to think being a great professor meant knowing everything. Now I realize it's about learning, especially from those whose experiences are different from mine." Their relationship grew into an unlikely partnership. Together, they co-authored a groundbreaking research paper on ethical robotics, combining Langley's technical expertise with Marcus's innovative problem-solving skills. The project challenged traditional approaches by emphasizing the importance of designing technology that served all communities, not just the privileged few. When the paper was published in a prestigious journal, it earned widespread acclaim, further solidifying Marcus's reputation as a visionary thinker. Yet, despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. He knew the journey wasn't over. There were still battles to fight and barriers to dismantle. Some resistance lingered among certain faculty members who viewed the changes at Crestwood as unnecessary or overly idealistic. They grumbled about lowering standards or coddling students, though their arguments carried less weight as evidence mounted, showing improved academic performance and retention rates among minority students. Marcus addressed this pushback head-on during a campus-wide symposium on innovation and inclusivity. Standing before an audience of students, professors, and alumni, he delivered a speech that resonated deeply. "Excellence isn't exclusive," he declared, his voice steady and confident. "It doesn't belong to one race, gender, or background. True greatness comes from embracing diverse perspectives because innovation thrives when we challenge each other to think differently." His words sparked a standing ovation, leaving many in tears, including Professor Whitaker, who approached him afterward with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry for doubting you," she confessed, her voice trembling. "You've shown us what real leadership looks like. Thank you for not giving up on us." The apology touched Marcus, but it also reminded him of how far they'd come, and how much work still lay ahead. He continued mentoring students, attending meetings, and advocating for systemic change, always leading by example. His tireless efforts inspired others to step up, creating a ripple effect that transformed Crestwood in ways no one could have predicted. One evening, as Marcus sat in the library reviewing drafts for another research proposal, Alex walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Still burning the midnight oil, huh?" Alex teased, handing him a cup. "You know, most people would take a break after saving the school and starting a revolution." Marcus chuckled, taking a sip of the warm brew. "Revolution takes time," he replied with a grin. "Besides, I'm not done yet. There's always more to do." Alex shook his head in admiration. "You're something else, you know that. You've changed this place and everyone in it for the better." Though Marcus appreciated the praise, he knew the credit belonged to everyone who had supported him along the way. From Dr. Patel's encouragement to Professor Langley's redemption arc, every victory was a collective effort. Still, he couldn't help but feel proud of what they had accomplished together. Crestwood was no longer the cold, unwelcoming institution he had first encountered. It was becoming a place where dreams could flourish, regardless of where someone came from. As he packed up his things and prepared to leave the library, Marcus paused to glance out the window. The campus looked peaceful under the glow of streetlights, its halls now filled with voices that once went unheard. He smiled softly, knowing he had played a part in making it so. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And Marcus Johnson was ready to keep moving forward, breaking barriers and inspiring others to do the same. Years had passed since Marcus Johnson first stepped onto the campus of Crestwood University, a place that once made him feel like an outsider. Now standing on the same stage where he had once been dismissed and doubted, Marcus looked out at a sea of faces, faces of all colors, backgrounds, and stories. It was commencement day, and he had returned to deliver the keynote address, invited not just as a former student but as a trailblazer who had left an indelible mark on the institution. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as graduates adjusted, their caps and parents snapped photos from the audience. When Marcus walked up to the podium, the room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that seemed to stretch on forever. He smiled warmly, waiting for the noise to subside before speaking. When he finally began, his voice carried both strength and humility. "Success," he said, pausing briefly to let the words sink in, "isn't measured by accolades or titles. It's measured by the lives we touch and the barriers we break." His eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on the graduating class seated before him. Many of them were minorities, first-generation college students, or individuals who had overcome tremendous odds to reach this moment. They were living proof of the changes Marcus had helped spark at Crestwood. He shared snippets of his own journey, the loneliness of being underestimated, the frustration of being dismissed, and the triumph of proving doubters wrong. But more importantly, he spoke about resilience. "When people tell you you don't belong, don't let them define your worth," he urged. "Instead, focus on what drives you, the passion inside that refuses to be silenced. Because when you rise above negativity, you inspire others to do the same." As he spoke, memories flooded back. Late nights in the library, tense conversations with professors, and the adrenaline-fueled moments during the drone crisis. Each experience had shaped him, teaching him lessons he now passed on to the next generation. He emphasized the importance of community, reminding the graduates that they didn't have to face challenges alone. "Find your allies," he advised. "Lift each other up because together we're unstoppable." His speech struck a chord, resonating deeply with everyone present. Some graduates wiped away tears, while others nodded vigorously, hanging on to every word. Even the faculty members seated behind him leaned forward, captivated by his message. By the time Marcus concluded with a call to action, "Go out there and leave the world better than you found it," the entire auditorium was on its feet, again cheering wildly. Afterward, as Marcus mingled with well-wishers during the reception, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Parents thanked him for paving the way for their children. Alumni praised him for transforming the university, and current students asked for advice on navigating their own journeys. Among the crowd, Professor Langley approached, his expression filled with pride. "You've done more than change this school, Marcus," he said earnestly. "You've changed us, all of us." Marcus shook his hand firmly, grateful for the acknowledgement but knowing the work wasn't solely his. "We did this together," he replied, "and there's still so much more to do." Later that evening, as he strolled across the quiet campus, under a starlit sky, Marcus reflected on how far he and Crestwork had come. The boy who had once been mocked had grown into a man whose legacy would endure long after he left. Through perseverance, courage, and unwavering belief in himself, he had turned adversity into opportunity, inspiring countless others to follow in his footsteps. As he reached the edge of the quad, Marcus paused to glance back at the towering buildings of Crestwood one last time. Somewhere deep within those walls, future leaders were dreaming big, ready to tackle the world's toughest problems. And though Marcus knew he couldn't stay forever, he took comfort in knowing his impact would live on through them. With a final smile, he turned and walked away, carrying with him not just memories but also hope, for himself, for Crestwood, and for the generations yet to come.